Marcus held his last $10 bill in trembling fingers, watching the elegant woman collapse on the rain-soaked sidewalk outside the luxury hotel. He had exactly 12 minutes to get home before his babysitter charged overtime he couldn't afford. But something in her desperate gasps for air made him forget about everything else, including the fact that this single decision would change both their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The neon lights of downtown Seattle reflected off the wet asphalt-like fractured dreams as Marcus Chan navigated his aging Honda Civic through the maze of late-night traffic. The car's heater had given up 3 months ago, the same week his ex-wife stopped sending child support, and the radio crackled with static that somehow matched the chaos in his mind. At 34, Marcus carried the weight of single parenthood like a badge of honor wrapped in exhaustion. His daughter Emma, 8 years old with curious dark eyes and an infectious laugh, waited at home with Mrs. Rodriguez, the neighbor who watched her during his night shifts. The arrangement cost him $40 each evening, money he scraped together from tips, and the occasional surge pricing that Seattle's unpredictable weather sometimes provided. Tonight had been particularly brutal, with only 2 rides in 4 hours, leaving him with barely enough to cover the babysitter and maybe breakfast for Emma tomorrow. The Uber app on his cracked phone screen showed one final ride request from the Four Seasons downtown. Marcus hesitated, his fuel gauge hovering dangerously close to empty, but the pickup location suggested a business traveler who might tip well. He accepted the ride, not knowing that this decision would unravel everything he thought he knew about fortune and fate. Victoria Ashworth sat in the marble bathroom of the presidential suite, her manicured hands shaking as she fumbled with the small bottle of heart medication. At 52, she had built Ashworth Industries from a small family textile business into a global empire worth over $2 billion. The company's name adorned skyscrapers from New York to Tokyo, and financial magazines regularly featured her on their covers as one of the most powerful women in business. Yet none of that mattered now, as her heart raced irregularly, each beat feeling like it might be her last. The stress of the hostile takeover attempt had been building for months. Her own board members, people she had trusted and elevated to positions of power, had betrayed her. The coup was set to happen in the morning, and despite her legal team's assurances, Victoria knew she was fighting a losing battle. The betrayal cut deeper than any business loss ever could. These weren't just colleagues. They were people she had considered family, individuals who had shared Christmas dinners at her estate and celebrated their children's graduations together. She had flown to Seattle for what might be her final board meeting as CEO, a last-ditch attempt to save the company her grandfather had founded in 1923. The medication she desperately needed was back in her New York penthouse, and her assistant had failed to pack her emergency supply. The hotel concierge had been unable to locate a pharmacy that could fill her prescription at this late hour without her cardiologist's direct authorization, and Dr. Morrison was unreachable on his anniversary vacation in Europe. As another wave of chest pain crashed over her, Victoria realized she needed to get to Seattle General Hospital immediately. She couldn't call her security detail without raising questions that would inevitably leak to the press, and the last thing she needed was headlines about her health crisis appearing before tomorrow's crucial board meeting. The irony wasn't lost on her that with all her wealth and connections, she was utterly alone in this moment of genuine need. Marcus pulled up to the Four Seasons just as the first drops of a Seattle downpour began to splatter against his windshield. The hotel's golden lights cast everything in a warm glow that seemed to mock the cold reality of his empty wallet. He waited exactly 3 minutes, watching the meter tick away precious fuel, before considering canceling the ride. That's when he saw her. A woman in an expensive navy coat stumbled out of the hotel's revolving door, one hand pressed against her chest, the other reaching desperately for the brass handrail. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see the pallor of her skin and the way she struggled to breathe. She wasn't drunk or dramatic. She was genuinely in distress. Every instinct told him this wasn't a typical ride request. Victoria spotted the Honda Civic with the Uber decal and fought through another wave of dizziness to reach the car. Her fingers barely managed to open the door before she collapsed into the back seat, her breathing shallow and rapid. The interior smelled like coffee and child's art supplies. a strangely comforting combination that reminded her of simpler times before boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions consumed her life. Marcus immediately turned around, his concern overriding any thoughts about his financial situation. The woman's face was ashen, and sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool evening air. This wasn't a routine pickup. This was a medical emergency. "Ma'am, are you okay? Do you need me to call an ambulance?" he asked, his voice gentle but urgent. Victoria tried to speak, but could only manage a whispered response. "Hospital. Please, just get me to the hospital." She pressed a hand to her chest, her breathing becoming more labored with each passing moment. Marcus didn't hesitate. He shifted the car into drive and began navigating towards Seattle General, his mind racing with possibilities. The woman was clearly wealthy, judging by her clothes and jewelry, but money meant nothing if she couldn't breathe. He had seen enough medical emergencies during his previous job as a paramedic before Emma was born, and he needed more flexible hours to recognize the signs of a serious cardiac event. The traffic seemed heavier than usual, with construction blocking 2 lanes on Pine Street and a minor accident causing delays near the waterfront. Marcus knew every shortcut in the city from his years of driving, but each red light felt like an eternity as he watched his passenger struggle in the rearview mirror. Her expensive handbag had fallen to the floor, its contents scattered across the worn carpet, but she seemed oblivious to everything except the pain radiating through her chest. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, trying to keep her conscious and talking. He had learned during his paramedic training that conversation could help prevent patients from slipping into shock. "Victoria," she managed between labored breaths. "Victoria Ashworth." The name meant nothing to Marcus, who rarely followed business news and spent his free time helping Emma with homework rather than reading financial publications. To him, she was simply a woman in crisis who needed his help, regardless of her background or bank account. As they approached the hospital, Victoria's condition seemed to worsen. Her breathing became more erratic, and she was struggling to remain upright in the seat. Marcus made a split-second decision that would define both their futures. Instead of dropping her at the emergency room entrance and driving away, he parked the car and helped her out, supporting her weight as they walked toward the hospital doors. The emergency room was bustling with typical Friday night chaos. Patients with various ailments filled the waiting area, and the triage nurse looked overwhelmed as she processed the steady stream of incoming cases. Marcus helped Victoria to the registration desk, where she fumbled through her scattered purse for her insurance card and identification. "I need to see a cardiologist immediately," Victoria told the nurse, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm having chest pain and irregular heartbeat." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and the patience that comes from years of dealing with medical emergencies, began asking the standard intake questions. Victoria's responses were becoming increasingly difficult to understand, and Marcus found himself translating and advocating for her, drawing on his medical training to communicate the severity of her symptoms. "She needs immediate attention," Marcus told the nurse firmly. "Her breathing is becoming more labored, and she's showing signs of cardiovascular distress. This can't wait for standard triage." The nurse looked at Marcus with new respect, recognizing his medical knowledge, and immediately called for a wheelchair. As the hospital staff prepared to take Victoria for immediate evaluation, she grabbed Marcus's hand with surprising strength. "Don't leave," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, I don't have anyone else here." Marcus looked at his watch. He was already 40 minutes past his scheduled return time, which meant Mrs. Rodriguez would charge him double overtime. The extra cost would drain his last $10, leaving him with nothing for Emma's breakfast or gas to get to his day job tomorrow. But looking at Victoria's frightened face, he knew he couldn't abandon her in this moment of vulnerability. "I'll stay," he said simply, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair in the emergency waiting area. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and anxious waiting. Marcus called Mrs. Rodriguez to explain the situation, wincing as she informed him about the additional charges but grateful that she agreed to stay with Emma until morning. He used his last $10 to buy coffee from the hospital vending machine, sharing it with Victoria when she was finally stable enough to drink something warm. During the long wait, Victoria began to open up about her life in ways she hadn't done with anyone in years. The betrayal by her board members had shattered her trust in people, and the stress of fighting for her company had taken a severe toll on her health. She spoke about her grandfather, who had built Ashworth Industries with his bare hands and taught her that business success meant nothing without integrity and compassion for others. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Marcus listened without judgment, sharing his own story of single parenthood and the daily struggle to provide for Emma while maintaining his dignity and dreams. He spoke about his brief career as a paramedic, cut short when his ex-wife left, and he needed more flexible hours to care for his daughter. He talked about Emma's love of drawing and her dream of becoming an artist, and how he was saving every spare dollar for her college fund, even if it was growing painfully slowly. As dawn broke over Seattle, Victoria's test results came back. The cardiologist Dr. Sarah Kim explained that she had experienced a severe anxiety-induced cardiac episode, complicated by her existing heart condition and the stress of recent events. With proper medication and rest, she would be fine, but she needed to make significant changes to her lifestyle and stress levels to prevent future episodes. "You're lucky your friend brought you in when he did," Dr. Kim told Victoria, nodding toward Marcus. Another hour of delay could have resulted in a full cardiac arrest. Victoria looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes, realizing that this stranger had literally saved her life by caring enough to stay. She had built her empire on calculated risks and strategic relationships, but Marcus had helped her without expecting anything in return, sacrificing his own financial stability to ensure her safety. As they prepared to leave the hospital, Victoria insisted on covering Marcus's ride home and the babysitting fees he had incurred. When she opened her wallet, Marcus was shocked to see the thick stack of $100 bills and the platinum credit cards that spoke to wealth beyond his imagination. Yet during their long conversation, she had seemed like any other person facing a crisis and needing human connection. "Let me give you my card," Victoria said, pulling out an elegant business card embossed with gold lettering. "I want to properly thank you for what you did tonight." Marcus took the card, reading, quote, "Victoria Ashworth, Chief Executive Officer, Ashworth Industries," with growing amazement. Even he recognized the company name from news reports and advertisements. The woman he had helped was one of the most successful business leaders in the country, yet she had been as vulnerable and frightened as anyone he had ever encountered in his ambulance days. "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said sincerely. "Anyone would have done the same thing." Victoria smiled sadly, knowing from years of business experience that very few people would have sacrificed their own financial security to help a stranger, regardless of that person's apparent wealth or status. Marcus had seen her not as a business opportunity or networking contact, but simply as a human being who needed help. As Marcus drove his battered Honda away from the hospital, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had changed during those long hours in the emergency room. He had connected with Victoria on a level that transcended their vastly different circumstances, sharing stories and fears that neither of them typically revealed to others. Her business card sat on his dashboard, a tangible reminder of an encounter that felt almost surreal in the morning light. Back at his small apartment, Emma was already awake and eating cereal while watching cartoons. Mrs. Rodriguez had fallen asleep on the couch, and Marcus gently woke her to settle the babysitting fees. The cost had indeed doubled due to the overtime, leaving him with empty pockets but a strange sense of satisfaction. Emma hugged him tightly, sensing that something important had happened during his absence. "Did you help someone last night, Daddy?" Emma asked with the intuitive wisdom that children sometimes possess. "Yes, sweetheart," Marcus replied, kissing the top of her head. "I helped someone who really needed it." Meanwhile, across the city in her hotel suite, Victoria sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, Marcus's kindness replaying in her mind like a song she couldn't forget. In a few hours, she would face her traitorous board members in what might be the most important meeting of her professional life, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of clarity about what truly mattered. The hostile takeover attempt suddenly seemed less important than the realization that she had become so isolated in her success that a stranger's compassion had felt like a miracle. Marcus had risked his own financial stability to help her, asking for nothing in return, and his genuine care had touched something in her heart that she thought had been buried beneath years of corporate battles and strategic maneuvering. As she prepared for the board meeting that would determine the future of her empire, Victoria found herself thinking not about stock prices and market positions, but about a single father who drove an aging Honda and shared his last cup of coffee with someone he had never met before. The contrast between Marcus's authentic generosity and her board members' calculated betrayal couldn't have been starker. The morning sun painted Seattle in shades of gold and possibility, and both Victoria and Marcus faced their respective challenges with a new understanding of what it meant to encounter genuine human kindness in an often indifferent world. Neither could have predicted that their late-night meeting would become the foundation for a connection that would transform both their lives in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. Victoria's phone buzzed with messages from her legal team, her assistant, and various board members. But she ignored them all. Instead, she found herself studying Marcus's business card, which he had given her before leaving the hospital. It was a simple white card with black text, Marcus Chen, Transportation Services, followed by his phone number. No fancy logos or embossed letters, just honest simplicity that reflected the man himself. The irony wasn't lost on her that while she was fighting to maintain control of a billion-dollar empire, the person who had shown her the most genuine care in years was struggling to afford breakfast for his daughter. The disparity troubled her in ways that went beyond simple guilt or pity. It highlighted everything that had gone wrong with her priorities and relationships over the years of relentless business focus. As she showered and dressed for what might be her final day as CEO, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her. Regardless of how the board meeting unfolded, she was going to find a way to properly thank Marcus for his kindness. Not with money or business opportunities, but with the same genuine human connection he had offered her during her darkest hour. Marcus, meanwhile, was getting Emma ready for school while calculating how he could stretch their remaining resources until his next paycheck. The $10 he had spent on Victoria's coffee represented Emma's lunch money for 2 days, but he found he didn't regret the expense. There had been something about Victoria's vulnerability that reminded him why he had originally become a paramedic, the satisfaction of helping people during their most difficult moments. As Emma gathered her art supplies for school, chattering excitedly about a drawing she wanted to finish, Marcus realized that despite their financial struggles, he had given his daughter something more valuable than money. He had shown her through his actions that kindness and compassion were worth more than personal gain, lessons that no amount of wealth could purchase. The day ahead would bring new challenges for both of them, but the foundation of trust and mutual respect they had built during those long hours in the hospital emergency room would prove stronger than either of them could have imagined. Victoria faced her board meeting with a new perspective on what success truly meant, while Marcus returned to his daily routine of driving and caring for Emma, unaware that his simple act of kindness had planted seeds that would soon bloom into possibilities beyond his wildest dreams. The story of their connection was just beginning, built on the solid ground of authentic human compassion rather than the shifting sands of wealth and status. In a world that often seemed to reward calculation over caring, their meeting represented hope that genuine goodness still existed and could bridge even the widest gaps between different lives and circumstances. 3 days after the hospital incident, Marcus was dropping off a fare at the Seattle Center when his phone buzzed with an unknown number. The text message was brief but intriguing. "Marcus, this is Victoria from the hospital. I have a proposition that might interest you. Could we meet for coffee? I promise it's worth your time." Marcus stared at the message while idling outside the Space Needle, watching tourists stream past in their rain jackets and cameras. He had thought about Victoria several times since that night, wondering how her board meeting had gone and whether she had recovered from her health scare. The business card she had given him sat in his wallet, a reminder of their unexpected connection, but he hadn't expected to hear from her again. Victoria had spent those same 3 days in a whirlwind of corporate warfare. The board meeting had been a bloodbath, with her supposed allies revealing the full extent of their betrayal. They had presented a vote of no confidence, backed by fabricated concerns about her health and leadership stability. The irony was bitter. While they questioned her fitness to lead, she had never felt more clarity about what truly mattered in life. She had managed to maintain control of the company, but barely, and only through legal maneuvering that would buy her time rather than solve the underlying problem. Her lawyers had found procedural violations in the takeover attempt, giving her a temporary reprieve, but she knew the battle was far from over. More importantly, the experience had crystallized something that had been growing in her mind since meeting Marcus. The coffee shop Victoria chose was a small, family-owned place in the Pike Place Market, far from the corporate towers where she usually conducted business. She arrived early, settling into a corner booth where she could observe the morning crowd of vendors, tourists, and locals grabbing their caffeine fix before starting their day. The atmosphere was warm and authentic, a stark contrast to the sterile conference rooms where she spent most of her time. Marcus arrived exactly on time, his appearance neat but clearly showing the wear of someone who worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. His jacket was clean but frayed at the edges, and Victoria noticed he ordered only black coffee, likely the cheapest option on the menu. She felt a pang of recognition, remembering her grandfather's stories about the early days of building Ashworth Industries when every dollar counted. "Thank you for coming," Victoria said as Marcus settled across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I have to admit, I was curious," Marcus replied, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "How did your meeting go the other day?" Victoria's expression darkened briefly. "Let's just say it reminded me why your kindness meant so much. It's rare to find people who help others without expecting something in return." They talked for nearly an hour, the conversation flowing as naturally as it had in the hospital waiting room. Victoria found herself sharing details about her business struggles that she wouldn't normally reveal to her closest advisors, while Marcus spoke candidly about the challenges of single parenthood and his dreams for Emma's future. There was an ease between them that transcended their different backgrounds, built on the foundation of genuine care they had established during their first meeting. "I have a proposition," Victoria said finally, leaning forward with the intensity that had made her a formidable business leader. "But first, I need to ask you something personal. Are you happy driving for Uber?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "It pays the bills and gives me flexibility to be there for Emma. But if I'm being honest, I miss the work I used to do. Being a paramedic felt like I was making a real difference in people's lives. What if I told you there was a way to combine both? Making a difference and having the flexibility you need for Emma?" Victoria reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder containing documents she had spent the previous day preparing. "Ashworth Industries has been looking to expand into healthcare services. I want to create a new division focused on emergency medical transport and community health initiatives. I need someone to head up the program. Someone who understands both the medical side and the human side of crisis response." Marcus stared at the job description. Victoria slid across the table. The salary listed was more than he made in 6 months of driving, and the benefits package included health insurance, education assistance for dependents, and a retirement plan. It seemed too good to be true, which immediately made him suspicious. "Why me?" he asked directly. "You could hire someone with an MBA and years of healthcare management experience." "Because those people have never spent their last $10 to buy coffee for a stranger in a hospital waiting room," Victoria replied. "They've never sacrificed their own financial security to help someone they just met. The technical skills can be taught, but the heart you showed that night can't be." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the opportunity, but also wary. In his experience, offers that seemed too generous usually came with hidden costs or expectations. "This feels like charity, Victoria. I don't want to be your pet project or your way of easing guilt about having money." Victoria's respect for Marcus deepened with his directness. "It's not charity if you earn it, and I have no doubt you would. But I understand your concerns. What if we started smaller? I need someone to consult on this new program, help me understand what communities really need versus what looks good in a business plan. The consulting fee would be substantial, and if things work out, we could discuss the full-time position later." The compromise felt more manageable to Marcus, who agreed to think about it over the weekend. As they prepared to leave, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of having her driver pick her up, she asked Marcus if he could give her a ride back to her hotel. She wanted to see his world from his perspective, to understand the daily reality of the work he did to support his daughter. Riding in Marcus's Honda was a revelation for Victoria. The car was meticulously clean despite its age, with Emma's artwork taped to the dashboard and a small emergency medical kit in the glove compartment. Marcus navigated the city streets with the confidence of someone who knew every shortcut and traffic pattern, while maintaining a steady stream of polite conversation that she realized was part of his professional skill set. "You're good at this," she observed as he smoothly merged into traffic while simultaneously fielding a ride request through his phone's hands-free system. You have to be, Marcus replied. People trust you with their safety and their time. Plus, Emma needs to know her dad takes pride in his work, whatever that work might be. The comment struck Victoria deeply. She had built a billion-dollar empire, but she couldn't remember the last time she had taken genuine pride in her daily work, rather than just focusing on results and profits. Marcus found meaning and dignity in driving strangers around Seattle, because he approached it with integrity and care for others. Over the following weeks, Victoria and Marcus began meeting regularly to discuss the healthcare initiative. What started as formal business consultations gradually evolved into something more personal and collaborative. Victoria would arrive at their meetings with detailed market research and financial projections, while Marcus brought insights from his medical training and stories from his interactions with passengers that revealed the real healthcare needs of working families. Their meetings moved from coffee shops to Victoria's temporary office in a downtown high-rise, where Marcus got his first real glimpse into her world of corporate power and responsibility. The office was impressive but sterile, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay and expensive artwork that seemed chosen more for investment value than personal meaning. Victoria noticed Marcus studying a photograph of her grandfather on her desk, the only personal item in the otherwise impersonal space. He built this company from nothing, Victoria said, following Marcus's gaze. Started with a single textile mill and grew it into what it is today through sheer determination and treating people fairly. What would he think of the current situation with your board? Marcus asked. Victoria's expression hardened. He'd be furious. Not just about the betrayal, but about how far the company has drifted from his original values. Somewhere along the way, we became focused on quarterly profits instead of long-term relationships and community impact. As their professional collaboration deepened, so did their personal connection. Victoria found herself looking forward to their meetings not just for the business discussions, but for Marcus's perspective on life and values. He had a way of cutting through corporate complexity to focus on what really mattered, asking questions that forced her to examine her motivations and priorities. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering aspects of the business world that he had never considered. Victoria wasn't just wealthy, she was brilliant, with an analytical mind that could process complex information and identify solutions that others missed. But more importantly, he saw how isolated her success had made her, surrounded by people who wanted something from her rather than caring about her as a person. The healthcare initiative began taking shape as something genuinely innovative. Rather than just another corporate program, it would integrate emergency medical services with community health education and support for underserved populations. Marcus's insights from his paramedic experience and his current interactions with diverse passengers helped Victoria understand gaps in the system that traditional healthcare companies had overlooked. One evening, as they worked late reviewing proposals from potential partner organizations, Victoria realized she was happier and more energized than she had been in years. The work felt meaningful in a way that quarterly earnings reports and board presentations never had. More than that, she was working with someone who valued her ideas and insights rather than just deferring to her authority because of her wealth and position. "I have something to confess," Victoria said as they packed up their materials for the night. "When I first offered you this consulting work, part of it was about feeling guilty for having so much while you were struggling financially. But that's not why I want to continue working with you." Marcus looked up from closing his laptop, giving her his full attention. "You make me remember why I wanted to be in business in the first place," Victoria continued. "Not just to make money, but to solve problems and help people. Working with you feels like the most important thing I've done in years." The admission hung in the air between them, carrying weight that went beyond professional collaboration. Marcus felt the same way but was hesitant to express it, knowing that their different circumstances made any personal relationship complicated. He was a single father working multiple jobs to make ends meet, while she was one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. The gap between their worlds seemed insurmountable, even as their personal connection continued to grow. "I feel the same way," Marcus said finally. "But Victoria, I need you to know that I'm not looking for someone to rescue me or solve my problems. Emma and I are doing okay on our own. If we're going to continue working together, or if this becomes something more personal, it has to be because we genuinely care about each other, not because you feel sorry for my situation." Victoria nodded, understanding his need to maintain his dignity and independence. "I know, and for what it's worth, I've never felt less sorry for someone in my life. You've accomplished more with limited resources than most people do with every advantage." You're raising a wonderful daughter, you're building something meaningful through this project, and you've maintained your integrity through challenges that would break a lot of people." Their conversation was interrupted by Marcus's phone ringing. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, calling to say that Emma had woken up with a fever and was asking for her father. Marcus immediately began gathering his things, his parental responsibilities taking priority over everything else. "Go," Victoria said without hesitation. "Emma needs you. We can finish this tomorrow." As Marcus hurried toward the elevator, Victoria found herself wishing she could help somehow, but knowing that this was a moment where her wealth and resources were irrelevant. Emma needed her father's care and comfort, things that couldn't be purchased or delegated. The realization only deepened her respect for Marcus and her understanding of the daily challenges he faced as a single parent. The next morning, Marcus called to apologize for leaving abruptly and to explain that Emma had a mild case of flu that would keep her home from school for a few days. Victoria surprised him by suggesting they move their meeting to his apartment, bringing work to him so he could care for his daughter, while still maintaining their project momentum. Victoria's arrival at Marcus's modest apartment complex was a study in contrasts. Her black sedan with a professional driver looked out of place in the parking lot filled with aging economy cars and delivery vehicles. But inside the small two-bedroom unit, she found something that all her wealth couldn't buy: a home filled with love, creativity, and genuine happiness. Emma's artwork covered the refrigerator and living room walls, colorful drawings that showed a child's perspective on the world around her. The furniture was second-hand but well-maintained, and every surface showed evidence of a father who took pride in providing a clean, safe environment for his daughter. Despite her fever, Emma was excited to meet the woman her father had been working with, shyly showing Victoria her latest drawings and chattering about her favorite subjects in school. Working in Marcus's living room while Emma napped on the couch gave Victoria insights into his daily reality that no amount of market research could provide. She saw how he balanced work calls with checking on his daughter, how he prepared simple but nutritious meals with careful attention to their grocery budget, and how he created an atmosphere of security and optimism despite their financial limitations. "She's remarkable," Victoria said quietly, watching Emma sleep peacefully under a handmade quilt. "She's everything to me," Marcus replied simply. "Every decision I make, every job I take, every sacrifice I'm willing to make, it's all for her future." Victoria felt a deep ache in her chest, recognizing something she had never experienced herself. She had built an empire and accumulated vast wealth, but she had never loved anyone with the fierce, selfless devotion that Marcus showed for his daughter. The realization made her question what she had really accomplished in her life, despite all her professional success. As Emma recovered over the next few days, Victoria continued visiting their apartment, ostensibly to work on the healthcare project, but really because she had found something precious in their simple home. Emma began looking forward to Victoria's visits, showing her new drawings and asking questions about the business world with the curious intelligence of a bright 8-year-old. "Why do you work in such a tall building?" Emma asked one afternoon while coloring at the kitchen table as Victoria and Marcus reviewed budget projections nearby. "Because that's where my company's offices are," Victoria explained. "But you know what? I think I like working here better. It's more comfortable, and the company is much better." Emma beamed at the compliment, while Marcus felt his heart skip at the implication that Victoria truly enjoyed being part of their daily routine. The domestic intimacy of sharing meals, helping with homework, and watching Emma's bedtime routine was transforming Victoria's understanding of what made life meaningful. One evening, after Emma was asleep and they had finished their work for the day, Victoria and Marcus found themselves talking on the small balcony overlooking the apartment complex's courtyard. The conversation had moved from business to personal topics, sharing stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears for the future. "I need to tell you something," Victoria said, her voice serious in the evening quiet. "The board situation at my company is getting worse. There's going to be another takeover attempt, and this time they might succeed. If that happens, our healthcare project might be canceled, and I might not be in a position to continue our work together." Marcus felt a surge of concern, not just for the project they had developed together, but for Victoria personally. He had seen how much the work meant to her, how it had rekindled her passion for business, and given her a sense of purpose beyond just accumulating wealth and power. "What can I do to help?" he asked without hesitation. Victoria smiled sadly. "Nothing, unfortunately. This is a battle I have to fight in boardrooms and lawyers' offices. But I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the company, these weeks working with you have been the best part of my year. You've reminded me what it feels like to do work that matters." The vulnerability in her admission broke down the last barriers between them. Marcus reached over and took her hand, a simple gesture that carried enormous weight given their careful maintenance of professional boundaries up to that point. "Victoria," he said softly, "I need you to know that you matter to me too, not because of your company or your resources, but because of who you are. You're brilliant and generous and stronger than you realize. Whatever happens with the board, you'll find a way through it." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, looking out at the lights of Seattle in the distance. Both of them knew that their relationship had crossed a line from professional collaboration to something deeper and more personal. The question was whether they could navigate the vast differences in their circumstances and build something real together. The next morning brought news that would test their growing connection in ways neither of them had anticipated. Victoria's phone rang early with a call from her legal team. The hostile takeover attempt had accelerated, and she needed to return to New York immediately for emergency meetings that could determine the future of Ashworth Industries. As Victoria packed hurriedly for her flight, she realized she was leaving behind more than just a consulting project. She was leaving Marcus and Emma, who had become the most important people in her life, to fight a battle that might cost her everything she had spent decades building. The irony wasn't lost on her that she might lose her fortune just as she had discovered what was truly worth fighting for. Victoria's hands trembled as she signed the legal documents in her Manhattan penthouse, the city lights blurring through tears she refused to let fall. The hostile takeover had succeeded. After 3 weeks of brutal corporate warfare, emergency board meetings, and legal maneuvering that consumed 18-hour days, Ashworth Industries was no longer hers. The company her grandfather had built from nothing, that she had grown into a global empire, now belonged to a consortium of investors who saw only profit margins where she had seen legacy and purpose. The final blow had come from David Kellerman, her former chief financial officer, and someone she had considered a close friend. His testimony about her erratic behavior and questionable health decisions had swayed the last undecided board members. The irony burned deep. The night she had spent helping a stranger in a hospital emergency room, the night that had reminded her what truly mattered in life, had been twisted into evidence of her unfitness to lead. Marcus learned about Victoria's corporate downfall through a brief news article on his phone while waiting in the Uber pickup line at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The headline read, "Ashworth Industries founder's granddaughter ousted in board coup," and the accompanying photo showed Victoria leaving the company headquarters with a stoic expression that barely concealed her devastation. His heart ached for her, knowing how much the company meant to her and understanding the betrayal she must be feeling. He had tried calling her multiple times over the past 3 weeks, but her phone went straight to voicemail. Her assistant had politely but firmly told him that Ms. Ashworth was unavailable and dealing with urgent corporate matters. Marcus understood that Victoria was fighting for everything she had built, but her silence left him wondering if their connection had been as meaningful to her as it had been to him. Emma had asked about Victoria every day, wondering when the nice lady would come back to help with her math homework and see her latest drawings. Marcus had run out of gentle explanations for Victoria's absence, and seeing his daughter's disappointment only deepened his own sense of loss. He realized that Victoria had become part of their family in ways he hadn't fully recognized until she was gone. 3 days after the news of her corporate defeat broke, Victoria stood in her empty office at Ashworth Industries, now stripped of personal belongings and memories. The new ownership had been swift and merciless in erasing any trace of her leadership, replacing her photographs and awards with generic corporate art and mission statements that spoke of efficiency rather than compassion. The healthcare initiative she and Marcus had developed together had been canceled immediately, deemed non-essential to core business objectives. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message that made her heart race. It was from Marcus. "I saw the news. I'm so sorry. Emma asks about you every day. We're both thinking of you." The simple message of support meant more to her than all the sympathy calls from business associates and media requests for her side of the story. Marcus wasn't reaching out because of her former position or wealth. He was reaching out because he cared about her as a person. That evening, Victoria made a decision that surprised even her closest advisors. Instead of staying in New York to manage the financial and legal aftermath of losing her company, she booked a flight to Seattle. She needed to see Marcus and Emma, to return to the place where she had rediscovered what really mattered in life. The corporate world had rejected her, but maybe there was still a place for her in the simple, authentic life she had found in Marcus's apartment. Marcus was picking up Emma from school when his phone rang with Victoria's number. His heart jumped at seeing her name, and he answered immediately, pulling over to give the conversation his full attention. "Marcus." Victoria's voice was strained but determined. "I'm in Seattle. I know I disappeared without proper explanation, and I'm sorry. Could we talk? I have so much to tell you." They agreed to meet at the small park near Emma's school, a neutral location where they could talk privately while Emma played on the playground equipment. When Victoria arrived, Marcus was struck by how different she looked. Gone were the expensive business suits and perfectly styled hair. Instead, she wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, and there was a vulnerability in her posture that he had never seen before. Emma spotted Victoria first and ran over with a shriek of delight, wrapping her arms around Victoria's waist in an enthusiastic hug. The genuine joy on both their faces told Marcus everything he needed to know about how much they had missed each other. "I thought you forgot about us," Emma said with the direct honesty of childhood. "Never," Victoria replied, kneeling down to Emma's eye level. "I could never forget about you. I had some very difficult things to deal with, but I'm here now." As Emma returned to the playground, Victoria and Marcus settled on a bench where they could talk while keeping an eye on her. Victoria took a deep breath and began explaining everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks. The betrayal by her board members, the legal battles, the systematic dismantling of everything she had built, and finally, the loss of her company and most of her wealth. "I'm not a billionaire anymore," Victoria said with a wry smile. "I'm not even a millionaire. The legal fees and settlements have taken most of what I had left after they forced me out. I have enough to live comfortably for a while, but my days of corporate power and unlimited resources are over." Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of bitterness or despair, but instead he saw something that looked almost like relief. "How do you feel about that?" he asked gently. "Surprisingly free," Victoria admitted. "For the first time in decades, I can make decisions based on what I want to do rather than what's expected of me or what will maximize shareholder value. It's terrifying and liberating at the same time." They talked for hours as Emma played, with Victoria sharing details about the corporate betrayal and Marcus offering the kind of steady, non-judgmental support that had drawn her to him in the first place. As the afternoon sun began to set, casting long shadows across the playground, Victoria gathered the courage to ask the question that had been weighing on her heart since her flight landed. "Marcus, I need to know if what we had was real. During those weeks we worked together, did you care about me as a person, or was it always about the business opportunity and what I could do for you and Emma?" The pain in her voice broke Marcus's heart. He realized that her experience with the board's betrayal had shaken her ability to trust anyone's motives, making her question even the most genuine relationships in her life. "Victoria," he said, taking her hands in his, "I cared about you from that first night in the hospital, long before I knew who you were or what you could offer. These past 3 weeks without you have been some of the loneliest of my life. Not because I missed the consulting work or the business opportunities, but because I missed you. Your laugh, your insights, the way you listened to Emma's stories like they were the most important things in the world." Tears finally spilled down Victoria's cheeks as she absorbed his words. "I was so afraid that once you knew I wasn't powerful anymore, wasn't wealthy anymore, you wouldn't want me around. The woman I fell in love with was never your money or your corporate position," Marcus said softly. "It was your kindness, your intelligence, your strength in facing challenges, and the way you made our little family feel complete. None of that has changed." The admission of love hung in the air between them, finally spoken aloud after weeks of careful emotional navigation. Victoria felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she realized that losing her company might have been the price she needed to pay to find something infinitely more valuable. Emma bounded over to them, breathless from playing and immediately sensing the emotional intensity of their conversation with the intuitive wisdom that children possess. "Are you staying this time?" she asked Victoria directly. Victoria looked at Marcus, seeking permission and confirmation, before answering, "If your daddy says it's okay, I'd like to stay for a while. I don't have anywhere else I need to be right now." "Can she stay with us, Daddy?" Emma asked excitedly. "She could sleep in my room and help me with my art projects." Marcus laughed at his daughter's immediate solution to their housing situation. "We'll figure something out, sweetheart. But yes, Victoria is welcome to stay as long as she wants." Over the following days, Victoria discovered what it meant to live a truly ordinary life for the first time in her adult existence. She found a small, furnished apartment near Marcus and Emma, close enough to be part of their daily routine, but independent enough to maintain her dignity and autonomy. The apartment was smaller than her former office bathroom, but she filled it with Emma's artwork and simple furnishings that she chose herself, rather than having an interior designer impose someone else's vision of luxury. Victoria also discovered the peculiar challenges and satisfactions of living on a budget. Shopping for groceries required planning and price comparison rather than simply buying whatever appealed to her. She learned to cook simple meals, finding unexpected pleasure in preparing dinner for Marcus and Emma, and sharing quiet evenings around their small kitchen table. The domesticity that had once seemed foreign and boring now felt like the most natural thing in the world. Marcus watched Victoria's transformation with amazement and growing love. The brittle executive armor she had worn during their business meetings melted away, revealing a woman who was funny, curious, and surprisingly adaptable. She threw herself into their daily routines with the same intensity she had once brought to corporate strategy. But now her focus was on creating moments of joy and connection rather than maximizing profits and market share. Emma blossomed under Victoria's attention, having a consistent adult presence who encouraged her artistic interests and helped with homework without the distraction of work calls and meetings. Victoria discovered that she had a natural gift for working with children, perhaps because she approached their concerns with the same seriousness and respect she had once reserved for board presentations. 1 month after Victoria's return to Seattle, Marcus made a decision that had been building in his heart since their reunion in the park. He arranged for Mrs. Rodriguez to watch Emma for the evening and took Victoria to dinner at a modest Italian restaurant in their neighborhood. The setting was nothing like the expensive establishments where Victoria had once conducted business dinners, but the intimacy and genuine connection made it perfect for what Marcus had planned. "Victoria," he said as they shared tiramisu for dessert, "I know this isn't the life you were born into, or the life you built for yourself. You're used to luxury and power and having resources to solve any problem. What Emma and I can offer you is much simpler than that." Victoria started to protest, but Marcus gently raised his hand to continue. "Let me finish. We can offer you a place where you're valued for who you are rather than what you own. We can offer you love that doesn't depend on your success or your ability to provide for us. We can offer you a family that will be there during good times and bad times, not because we have to, but because we choose to." Marcus reached across the small table and took Victoria's hand. "I'm asking if you want to build something permanent with us, not as our benefactor or our provider, but as our partner. Will you marry me?" Victoria's breath caught as Marcus pulled out a simple ring that was clearly chosen with careful thought rather than impressive expense. The stone was small but beautiful, and the setting was elegant in its simplicity. It represented everything about their relationship: genuine, unpretentious, and focused on substance rather than appearance. "Yes," Victoria whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, I want to build a life with you and Emma. I want to be part of your family." As Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, Victoria realized that she had never felt richer in her life. The corporate empire was gone, the billions of dollars had vanished, but she had found something that no amount of money could purchase: a love that accepted her completely, and a family that wanted her for who she truly was. Their wedding 6 months later was a small affair, held in the same park, where Victoria had confessed her fears about losing her wealth and status. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, wearing a dress she had helped design and carrying flowers they had picked together from Victoria's small apartment garden. The guest list included Mrs. Rodriguez, a few of Marcus's paramedic friends, and Victoria's former assistant Sarah, who had remained loyal despite the corporate upheaval. Victoria wore a simple white dress she had found at a local boutique, a far cry from the designer gowns that had filled her former walk-in closet. But as she walked down the grass aisle toward Marcus and Emma, she had never felt more beautiful or more complete. The ceremony was officiated by a justice of the peace who had known Marcus since his paramedic days, and the vows they exchanged spoke of partnership, respect, and commitment to building something lasting together. As they celebrated with cake and champagne in the community center near their apartment complex, Victoria reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She had lost everything she thought defined her success and happiness, only to discover that real wealth couldn't be measured in dollars or corporate achievements. The love she shared with Marcus and Emma, the simple joy of daily routines and shared responsibilities, the satisfaction of contributing to their family through care rather than money, these were treasures that no hostile takeover could ever steal. Emma, now 9 years old and officially Victoria's stepdaughter, had grown confident and artistic under the combined attention of her father and new mother. Her latest drawing, prominently displayed on their refrigerator, showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, with "My Family" written in careful cursive across the bottom. It was worth more to Victoria than any corporate award or magazine cover had ever been. Marcus continued driving for Uber, but now it felt less like survival and more like choice. Victoria had found part-time work at a local nonprofit focused on healthcare access for underserved communities, using her business skills to help organizations that couldn't afford high-end consulting services. The pay was modest, but the work felt meaningful in ways that corporate strategy sessions never had. In the evenings, they would gather around their small kitchen table for dinner, sharing stories about their days, and planning weekend adventures that cost little but created lasting memories. Victoria discovered that happiness wasn't about having unlimited options or resources. It was about having people who truly knew and loved you, and finding purpose in daily acts of care and connection. 2 years after their wedding, Victoria received an unexpected phone call from a lawyer in New York. The consortium that had taken over Ashworth Industries had driven the company into bankruptcy through mismanagement and excessive debt. As the legal proceedings unfolded, it emerged that the takeover had been built on fraudulent financial projections and insider trading. Victoria was offered the opportunity to buy back her grandfather's company for a fraction of its former value. She discussed the opportunity with Marcus over dinner, weighing the pros and cons with the careful consideration they now brought to all major decisions. They could afford to make the purchase using savings they had accumulated through careful budgeting and Victoria's modest inheritance from a distant aunt. The question wasn't whether they could do it, but whether they should. "What does your heart tell you?" Marcus asked, knowing that Victoria's analytical mind had already calculated all the financial angles. "That I want to honor my grandfather's legacy, but not at the expense of what we've built here," Victoria replied. "If we do this, it has to be on our terms, focused on the values that matter to us." They decided to proceed, but with conditions that would have seemed impossible during Victoria's previous corporate life. The new Ashworth Industries would be a certified B Corporation, legally committed to balancing profit with social and environmental responsibility. Victoria would serve as CEO, but the company would be structured as a worker cooperative, with employees having ownership stakes and decision-making power. The healthcare initiative she and Marcus had originally developed would be the company's primary focus, expanded to serve communities across the Pacific Northwest. Marcus left his Uber driving to become the company's director of community outreach, using his medical background and understanding of working families' needs to guide their program development. Emma, now 11 and showing remarkable artistic talent, designed the company's new logo, a simple tree with deep roots and spreading branches, representing growth that stayed connected to fundamental values. The rebuilt Ashworth Industries would never be the billion-dollar empire Victoria had once commanded, but it became something more valuable, a business that measured success by the communities it served and the lives it improved rather than just the profits it generated. Victoria found that leading with purpose rather than purely financial metrics brought satisfaction that her previous corporate achievements had never provided. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Marcus and Victoria stood on the balcony of their modest home, now expanded to include a small art studio for Emma, and a home office where Victoria could work on community health initiatives. The Seattle skyline sparkled in the distance, no longer representing a world of corporate power that had excluded them, but simply the city where they had built a life based on love and shared values. "Do you ever miss it?" Marcus asked, gesturing toward the downtown towers where Victoria had once wielded enormous influence. Victoria considered the question seriously, as she always did. "I miss the resources to solve problems quickly, and sometimes I miss the intellectual challenge of managing complex organizations. But I don't miss the loneliness or the constant worry about who I could trust. I don't miss measuring my worth by stock prices and board approval." She turned to face her husband, this man who had saved her life in ways that went far beyond that first night in the hospital emergency room. The woman who lost that empire was successful but not happy. "The woman standing here with you has everything she actually needs." Emma called to them from inside the house, where she was putting finishing touches on a painting she planned to enter in a youth art competition. Her work had grown sophisticated and emotionally resonant, influenced by a childhood that had taught her to value authentic relationships and community contribution over material accumulation. As they went inside to admire Emma's latest creation, Victoria reflected on the strange mathematics of loss and gain that had defined her journey. She had lost billions of dollars and gained a family. She had lost corporate power and gained personal purpose. She had lost the respect of financial magazines and gained the love of people who knew her true character. The painting Emma showed them depicted a tree growing through concrete, its roots finding nourishment in unexpected places and its branches reaching towards sunlight that broke through urban shadows. It was, Victoria realized, a perfect metaphor for their family story, finding ways to thrive and grow even when circumstances seemed impossible, creating beauty and strength through perseverance and mutual support. That night, as Victoria tucked Emma into bed and listened to her stepdaughter's plans for summer art camp and her excitement about starting middle school, she understood that she had become wealthy in ways that no financial portfolio could capture. The richness of daily routines shared with people she loved, the satisfaction of work that served others, the security of relationships built on honesty and mutual respect, these were investments that paid dividends in joy and meaning, rather than dollars and status. Marcus found her standing in Emma's doorway, watching their daughter sleep peacefully surrounded by her artwork and books. He slipped his arm around Victoria's waist, and they stood together in comfortable silence, appreciating the quiet miracle of an ordinary evening in an extraordinary life they had built together. The story that had begun with Victoria's collapse on a rainy Seattle sidewalk had evolved into something neither of them could have predicted. A love story that proved true wealth couldn't be stolen by corporate raiders or diminished by financial loss. It could only be created through the daily choice to care more about each other than about personal gain, to build something lasting rather than just something profitable. 5 years after rebuilding Ashworth Industries, Victoria stood before a congressional committee in Washington, D.C., testifying about healthcare access in underserved communities. The committee room was packed with lobbyists, journalists, and advocates, but Victoria's focus remained on the simple truth she had learned through years of working directly with families who struggled to afford basic medical care. "Senators, the data is clear," Victoria said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from experience rather than corporate positioning. "When we provide accessible emergency medical services and preventative care in low-income neighborhoods, we don't just save lives, we save money. Every dollar invested in community health programs returns $4 in reduced emergency room costs and increased economic productivity." Senator Patricia Williams from Oregon leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Ms. Ashworth, your company's model is certainly admirable, but how do you propose scaling these programs nationally when they operate at such thin profit margins?" Victoria smiled, remembering a conversation she'd had with Marcus the night before. He had helped her prepare for exactly this question by sharing stories from his current work, coordinating medical response teams across Washington state. "Senator, that question assumes that thin profit margins are a problem to be solved, rather than a feature of sustainable healthcare delivery. Our margins are thin because we prioritize accessibility over profitability. We measure success by lives improved rather than shareholders enriched." The hearing continued for 3 hours, with Victoria fielding questions about funding mechanisms, regulatory compliance, and scalability concerns. Throughout the testimony, she drew on examples from the community health centers that Ashworth Industries had established in 12 cities across the Pacific Northwest. Each center combined emergency medical services with preventative care, health education, and social support services. creating a model that addressed the root causes of health disparities rather than just treating symptoms. After the hearing, Victoria walked through the halls of the Capitol building, reflecting on how different this experience felt from her previous visits to Washington. During her corporate empire days, she had come here to lobby for tax advantages and regulatory changes that would benefit Ashworth Industries' bottom line. Today, she had come to advocate for policies that would help families like the ones Marcus served through his community outreach work. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma, now 16, and preparing for her junior year of high school. The message included a photo of her latest painting, a vibrant landscape depicting Seattle's skyline with Mount Rainier in the background, accompanied by the text, "Finished this while you were making Congress listen to common sense. Dad says dinner is at 7, and he's making your favorite pasta." Victoria's heart swelled with pride and affection. Emma had grown into a remarkable young woman, combining artistic talent with the social consciousness that came from growing up in a household that valued community service over personal gain. She volunteered at the local community health center, helping elderly patients navigate insurance paperwork and teaching art therapy sessions for children dealing with trauma. The flight back to Seattle gave Victoria time to process the day's testimony and plan for the challenges ahead. The congressional hearing had gone well, but she knew that translating political support into actual policy changes would require sustained effort and coalition building. More importantly, she needed to ensure that any national expansion of their community health model maintained the personal touch and local responsiveness that made it effective. Marcus met her at the airport, his embrace immediately washing away the stress of the day's political theater. At 51, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had found his purpose in life. His role as Director of Community Outreach had evolved into something approaching a calling, as he worked with local organizations to identify healthcare gaps and develop innovative solutions. "How did it go?" he asked as they walked to their car, his hand warm and reassuring in hers. "I think we made some progress," Victoria replied. Senator Williams seemed particularly interested in the data about reduced emergency room costs. If we can get her support, the rest of the western states might follow. During the drive home, Victoria shared details about the testimony while Marcus updated her on developments in their local programs. A new community health center was opening in Tacoma, and they had received a grant to expand their mobile medical unit program to serve rural communities in eastern Washington. The work was demanding and sometimes frustrating, but both of them felt energized by the tangible impact they were making in people's lives. Emma was waiting for them in the kitchen, homework spread across the table alongside art supplies and college brochures. She had inherited Victoria's analytical mind and Marcus's compassionate heart, creating a unique perspective on the world that impressed teachers and college admissions counselors alike. Her academic achievements were remarkable, but what made Victoria most proud was Emma's genuine desire to use her talents in service of others. "Dad told me about the new research findings," Emma said, looking up from her calculus homework. "The ones showing that community health programs reduce childhood asthma rates by 30%. I want to use that data for my senior research project about environmental justice and public health." Victoria sat down beside her stepdaughter, marveling at how naturally Emma connected complex social issues to the work their family was doing. "That's a brilliant topic, sweetheart. Have you thought about which colleges might have the best programs for that kind of interdisciplinary research?" Emma gestured to the brochures scattered across the table. "I've been looking at schools with strong public health programs, but I also want somewhere with good art departments. I keep thinking about how visual communication could help people understand health policy better." The conversation continued through dinner, with all three of them contributing ideas about Emma's research project and college plans. Victoria realized that these evening discussions around their kitchen table had become some of her most treasured moments. The intellectual stimulation was as rich as any corporate strategy session, but grounded in love and shared values rather than competitive positioning. After Emma went to bed, Victoria and Marcus settled on their back porch with cups of tea, watching the lights of Seattle twinkle in the distance. The view reminded Victoria of their early days together, when she was still adjusting to life without corporate power and unlimited resources. Now, their modest home felt like the center of the universe, a place where important work was planned and meaningful relationships were nurtured. "I've been thinking about succession planning," Victoria said, breaking the comfortable silence. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Succession planning? We're not that old yet, are we? Victoria laughed. Not retirement succession, but organizational development. Ashworth Industries has grown beyond what either of us can manage alone. We need to start identifying and training the next generation of leaders. People who share our values but bring fresh perspectives and energy. She had been wrestling with this challenge for months, knowing that sustainable growth required distributing leadership rather than concentrating it in the hands of founders. The cooperative structure of the company helped, but they still needed individuals capable of guiding strategic decisions and maintaining the organization's mission focus as it expanded. What about promoting from within? Marcus suggested. Some of our program coordinators have shown real leadership potential, and they understand our approach from the ground up. That's exactly what I was thinking. Maria Gonzalez in Portland has been incredible at building community partnerships, and David Kim in Spokane has developed some innovative approaches to rural healthcare delivery. Maybe it's time to create regional director positions and give them more autonomy. They spent the next hour sketching out ideas for organizational restructuring, drawing on their combined experience in business management and community development. The conversation was both practical and philosophical, addressing operational concerns while ensuring that any changes aligned with their fundamental commitment to serving communities rather than enriching shareholders. The following Monday, Victoria called a meeting of all program coordinators and senior staff, using video conferencing to connect their teams across the Pacific Northwest. The meeting began with updates from each community health center, highlighting successes and challenges from the previous quarter. Maria Gonzalez reported that their Portland center had achieved a 25% reduction in emergency room visits among their regular clients, while also launching a new program for supporting families dealing with mental health crises. David Kim shared data showing that their mobile medical units had provided care to over 3,000 rural residents who previously had limited access to healthcare services. The successes were gratifying, but Victoria was equally interested in the challenges and failures that each site reported. A program for diabetes management in low-income communities had struggled with participant retention, while efforts to integrate mental health services with primary care had encountered unexpected regulatory barriers. These setbacks provided valuable learning opportunities and reminded everyone that meaningful change required persistence and adaptation. I want to talk about the future of our organization, Victoria said after all the updates had been shared. We've proven that our model works, and we're getting requests to expand into new communities faster than we can responsibly manage. The question is how we grow while maintaining the personal touch and community responsiveness that makes us effective. She outlined her ideas about regional directors and increased local autonomy, emphasizing that expansion should be driven by community needs rather than organizational ambitions. The discussion that followed was rich and thoughtful, with program coordinators sharing insights about what worked in their specific contexts and what might translate to other communities. Sarah Chen, who managed their mental health integration programs, raised an important concern. I worry that as we grow, we might lose the informal networks and personal relationships that make our programs so effective. When Maria calls me about a client who's moving from Portland to Seattle, we can coordinate care seamlessly because we know and trust each other. How do we preserve that as we scale up? The question sparked extended discussion about organizational culture and communication systems. Victoria found herself thinking about the difference between her current company and the corporate empire she had once commanded. Ashworth Industries in its previous incarnation had been efficient but impersonal, with clear hierarchies and standardized procedures that prioritize consistency over relationship building. Maybe the answer isn't to preserve informal networks, but to formalize the values that make them work, Marcus suggested. We could create structured opportunities for cross-site collaboration and relationship building, while also developing protocols that ensure continuity of care regardless of staff turnover. The meeting continued for 2 hours, ending with concrete action items and timeline for implementing organizational changes. Victoria felt energized by the collaborative decision-making process and the obvious commitment that all staff members showed to their shared mission. Building this kind of organizational culture took time and intentional effort, but the results were worth the investment. That evening, Emma approached Victoria with a college application essay that she had been working on. The prompt asked students to describe a moment when their perspective on success had changed, and Emma had written about watching her parents rebuild their lives and work after Victoria's corporate downfall. I hope this isn't too personal, Emma said, handing over the printed pages. "But I couldn't think of any experience that had shaped my values more than seeing how you and Dad chose to define success differently than most people." Victoria read the essay with growing emotion, struck by Emma's mature understanding of the choices that had shaped their family's trajectory. Emma wrote about learning that true wealth meant having work that mattered, relationships based on genuine care, and the ability to contribute to community well-being rather than just personal advancement. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," Victoria said, wiping away tears. "But more than that, it's wise. You've understood something that took me decades to learn." Emma sat down beside her. "I've been thinking about college and career choices, and I realized that I want to follow the example you and Dad set. Not necessarily the same work, but the same approach to choosing what matters." The conversation continued as Marcus joined them, and Victoria found herself reflecting on the unexpected ways that their family's journey had influenced Emma's development. The teenager had grown up watching her parents navigate the tension between financial security and meaningful work, between personal success and community contribution. These lessons had shaped her character in ways that no amount of inherited wealth could have matched. Over the following months, the organizational restructuring of Ashworth Industries proceeded smoothly, with Maria Gonzalez and David Kim stepping into regional director roles and 3 other program coordinators taking on expanded responsibilities. The transition required careful planning and extensive training, but the results exceeded Victoria's expectations. Local programs became more responsive to community needs, while maintaining coordination and shared standards across sites. The success of their expansion efforts attracted attention from other organizations and policymakers interested in replicating their model. Victoria found herself traveling frequently to consult with community health organizations in other states, sharing both successes and failures from their experience. The consulting work was unpaid, part of their commitment to supporting the broader movement for healthcare justice, but it also provided valuable learning opportunities and network building. One particularly meaningful consultation took place in Detroit, where a coalition of community organizations was trying to address healthcare disparities in neighborhoods that had been devastated by economic decline. Victoria spent 3 days meeting with local leaders, touring existing programs, and helping to develop a strategic plan for integrated community health services. The Detroit trip reminded Victoria of her early days working with Marcus to understand the real healthcare needs of working families. The community leaders she met had deep knowledge of their neighborhoods and strong relationships with residents, but they lacked resources and organizational support for expanding their impact. Victoria's role was to help them think strategically about sustainability and growth while respecting their community knowledge and leadership. On her final day in Detroit, Victoria visited a small clinic that served predominantly elderly residents with chronic health conditions. The clinic operated on a shoestring budget, but provided care with obvious compassion and cultural competence. The director, an older woman named Dr. Ruth Washington, had been serving the community for over 30 years and had seen firsthand how policy changes and economic shifts affected her patients' health. "The thing that impresses me about your Seattle model," Dr. Washington said as they toured the clinic's cramped but spotless facilities, "is that you've figured out how to grow without losing your soul. Too many programs start with good intentions but get corrupted when they focus more on expansion than on the people they're supposed to serve." Victoria nodded, thinking about the careful balance they had tried to maintain between growth and mission focus. "It helps that we structured the organization as a cooperative from the beginning, so staff members have real ownership and decision-making power. But you're right that it requires constant vigilance to keep the focus on community benefit rather than organizational aggrandizement." The conversation with Dr. Washington stayed with Victoria during her flight home, reinforcing her conviction that sustainable social change required deep community roots and long-term relationship building rather than just good intentions and adequate funding. The most effective programs emerged from communities themselves, with outside organizations providing support and resources rather than imposing solutions. Back in Seattle, Victoria found Emma in the midst of college application season, balancing schoolwork with art projects and volunteer commitments. Emma had been accepted to several excellent universities, but she was struggling with the decision about where to attend and what to study. The choices reflected the complexity of her interests and values: public health programs that would prepare her for policy work, art schools that would develop her creative talents, and liberal arts colleges that would provide broad intellectual foundation. "I keep thinking about the conversation we had with Dr. Washington," Emma said one evening, as they reviewed financial aid packages together. She's been serving her community for 30 years, but she also studied art in college and uses creative approaches in her medical practice. Maybe I don't have to choose between art and public health. Victoria smiled at Emma's integrative thinking. You're right that those interests don't have to be separate. Some of the most effective health educators I know use visual arts to communicate complex information in accessible ways. They spent the evening researching universities that offered interdisciplinary programs combining public health with communication arts, finding several options that Emma hadn't previously considered. The process reminded Victoria of her early days working with Marcus to develop their healthcare initiative, when they had discovered that the most innovative solutions emerged from combining different perspectives and areas of expertise. As Emma's high school graduation approached, Victoria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought their family to this point. 8 years earlier, she had been a corporate executive focused on quarterly earnings and market positioning. Now she was the co-founder of a community health organization that measured success by lives improved rather than profits generated. The transformation had been difficult and sometimes painful, but it had also been the most meaningful work of her career. The graduation ceremony took place on a warm June evening, with families gathered on the football field to celebrate their children's achievements. Emma delivered the valedictorian speech, focusing on the theme of service and social responsibility. Her words were eloquent and inspiring, but what moved Victoria most was the obvious sincerity behind them. Emma truly believed in the values of community contribution and social justice that had shaped her upbringing. After the ceremony, the Chen Ashworth family celebrated at their favorite neighborhood restaurant, joined by Mrs. Rodriguez and several of Emma's teachers who had become family friends over the years. The celebration was modest but joyful, reflecting the values that had guided their household throughout Emma's childhood. I'm proud of the young woman you've become, Victoria told Emma as they walked home together under the Seattle summer sky. Not just because of your academic achievements, but because of your character and your commitment to making the world better. Emma squeezed her stepmother's hand. I learned from watching you and Dad that success means different things to different people, but the most satisfying kind involves helping others and staying true to your values. As they reached their front porch, Victoria realized that this moment represented a kind of completion. The scared, isolated executive who had collapsed outside a Seattle hotel 8 years earlier had been transformed through love and purpose into someone who understood what real wealth meant. More importantly, she had helped raise a young woman who would carry those values forward into the next generation. The story that had begun with Marcus's decision to spend his last $10 helping a stranger had evolved into something far greater than either of them could have imagined. A family built on mutual care, an organization dedicated to community service, and a legacy of values that would outlast any corporate empire. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.